The park was Catherine's sanctuary, a green and gentle escape tucked between the busy hum of the city. Every day when her work was done and the world felt a little too loud, she would come here. Her feet knew the path by heart, carrying her past the bubbling fountain, under the arching branches of the old oak trees, to a very specific destination, a weathered wooden bench nestled in a quiet corner. It was her bench. The slats were smoothed by years of weather and countless visitors, but to Catherine, it felt like it was waiting just for her. She would settle here with a book, the printed words and the rustling leaves her only companions, and for a precious hour, everything felt perfectly still. This particular afternoon promised the same quiet peace. The sun was warm on her shoulders as she approached her spot, her current novel tucked under her arm. But as she drew nearer, her steps slowed, then stopped completely. A bright yellow notice was taped squarely across the bench's seat, fluttering slightly in the breeze. The bold, black letters were a jarring interruption to the calm scene. Bench closed for repair. A sigh escaped her, a small cloud of disappointment. It felt silly how such a small thing could cast a shadow over her day. It was just a bench, she told herself. But it wasn't, not really. It was her place of calm. She was about to turn away to find another spot that wouldn't feel nearly as right, when a movement from nearby caught her eye. A man was kneeling on the grass beside the bench. He had his back to her, his focus entirely on a low toolbox open beside him. He wore a simple t-shirt and the muscles in his shoulders shifted as he worked. Curious, Catherine took a few steps closer. She saw then what he was doing. He wasn't just patching it up. He was carefully, methodically running a piece of sandpaper over one of the armrests. His movements were slow and deliberate, not rushed at all. With every pass of his hand, the old grayish wood gave way to a smoother, warmer, honey-colored grain underneath. He was revealing the beauty that had been hidden beneath years of wear. She stood there, watching for a moment, captivated by the quiet dedication of his work. He hadn't noticed her yet. The rasp of the sandpaper was a soft, rhythmic sound, like another kind of silence. She felt like she was intruding on a private moment, yet she couldn't bring herself to walk away. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice softer than she intended. He started slightly, turning his head to look over his shoulder. She saw his face properly then. He had kind eyes, the color of the earth after a rain, and dark hair that was a little messy from the breeze. He wasn't movie star handsome, but his face was open and calm. He looked like someone who knew how to listen. "I'm sorry to bother you," Catherine continued, clasping her hands behind her back. This is my favorite bench." He turned fully now, wiping his hands on his jeans. He gave her a small, shy smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "It's a good one," he said, his voice a warm, low rumble. "It just needs a little help to remember that." "I was wondering," she asked, feeling a boldness she didn't usually possess, "would it be okay if I sat here? Not on the bench, I mean. On the grass. And just watched you work? I promise I won't be in the way." He seemed surprised by the request, his gaze studying her for a second. He looked at her, really looked, not as a stranger but as a person. He saw her hopeful expression, the book in her hand, and he must have decided she was harmless. The shy smile returned. "Sure," he said. "Company's nice. Name's William." "I'm Catherine," she replied, feeling a little flutter of happiness as she carefully settled herself on the soft grass a polite distance away. And so she watched. William went back to his sanding, his focus returning to the wood. But the silence between them now was different. It was a comfortable, shared silence. He would occasionally pause, run his fingers over the surface to check its smoothness, and then select a different, finer grit of sandpaper from his toolbox. Catherine noticed how careful his hands were. They were strong, capable hands with a few small nicks and scars, but they handled the wood with a surprising tenderness. After a while she spoke again, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Do you fix a lot of things for the city?" William nodded, not stopping his work. "Yeah. Benches, playground equipment, broken fences. I like it. It feels good to take something that's broken or worn out and make it useful again. To give it a second chance." He glanced at the book in her lap. "What are you reading?" Catherine held it up. "It's an adventure story. About explorers finding a lost city." He smiled. "Sounds more exciting than sanding." "Oh, I don't know," she said thoughtfully, looking at the bench. "What you're doing is a little like an adventure. You're discovering what's underneath. You're uncovering the story of the wood." William paused, looking at the bench with a new perspective, then looked back at her with a deeper appreciation. "I never thought of it like that," he admitted. They talked more as the afternoon sun began to stretch their shadows long across the grass. Catherine learned that William loved the quiet of the early morning, that he could identify almost any bird by its song, and that he lived in a small cottage on the edge of town. William learned that Catherine worked with words, that she loved the smell of rain on hot pavement, and that she believed every good story needed both exciting adventures and quiet moments. Finally, William put his tools away. The bench was transformed. No longer a sad, closed-off thing, it glowed in the late afternoon light, its grain vibrant and its surface silky smooth. "It's finished," he said, standing back to admire his work. Catherine stood up, brushing the grass from her dress. She stepped forward and, almost reverently, reached out her hand. She let her fingertips glide along the armrest he had been working on. It was perfectly smooth, no longer able to give a splinter, feeling almost alive with warmth from the sun and his care. She looked at William, her eyes bright. "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it with all her heart. "You didn't just fix it, William. You made it new." William looked from the bench to her face, seeing the genuine admiration there. A full, warm smile spread across his face, the first one she'd seen that reached all the way to his eyes. It was a smile that made her feel like she'd said exactly the right thing. In that moment, on a perfect afternoon, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the park, a simple bench repair felt like the most important thing that had ever happened. It felt like a beginning. The following day, a strange and unfamiliar sense of anticipation buzzed beneath Catherine's skin. Her work with words felt distant, the sentences on her screen blurring into meaninglessness as she watched the clock. The park, once a place of solitary retreat, now felt like a destination. The bench was fixed, the yellow sign was gone, but something else, something far more compelling, now resided there. She found herself thinking not of the quiet peace the spot offered, but of the quiet man with the earth-colored eyes. The memory of his smile, the one that had so transformed his face, was a persistent thought she kept returning to, like a favorite passage in a book. This restlessness led her to a small market near her apartment. She stood before the chilled cabinet, staring at rows of beverages, before decisively selecting 2 large frosty cups of lemonade, the condensation immediately cooling her palms. It was a simple gesture, a thank you, but it felt significant. Holding the 2 cups carefully, she made her now familiar journey through the park, her heart performing a curious little rhythm against her ribs. What if he wasn't there? What if yesterday was just a singular, happy accident? But as she rounded the final bend in the path, her worries melted away. There he was. William was not working today. He was simply sitting on their bench. Their bench, the thought arrived unbidden, as if waiting. He saw her approach, his gaze dropping to the 2 cups in her hands, and that same slow, crinkle-eyed smile spread across his face, a smile that seemed to say he'd been hoping too. "I come in peace," Catherine said, her voice a little breathless as she held out one of the cups. "And with lemonade. To say thank you for giving me back my spot." William took the cup, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second, sending a small warm shock up her arm. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice full of genuine appreciation. "But thank you. It's a hot one today." She sat beside him, not on the grass as a spectator but on the bench as a companion. The silence that fell between them was as comfortable as the one the day before, but now it was filled with a new potential. They sipped their drinks, watching the world go by, a squirrel chasing its shadow, a couple pushing a stroller, clouds drifting like slow-moving ships. "So, a lost city," William began, breaking the silence and picking up the thread of yesterday's conversation as if no time had passed at all. "What's the secret to finding it?" And so she told him. She didn't just summarize the plot. She poured the story out for him, describing the dense, fictional jungles, the cryptic maps, the heart-pounding moment when the heroes first glimpsed the ancient, vine-choked towers. William listened, not just politely but actively, his eyes on her face, asking questions, wondering about the characters' motives. In return, he began to share stories from his own life. Not grand, fictional adventures but small, real ones. He told her about the time he spent an entire week restoring an old rocking horse for his niece, about the stubbornness of a particular piece of oak he'd once carved, about the simple satisfaction of seeing a broken thing made whole. This exchange, this simple sharing of stories, became their new ritual. The next day, Catherine arrived with a blanket and a small basket containing sandwiches and fresh strawberries. William, in turn, brought a story of his own, about a family of birds that had nested in the eaves of his cottage. Their meetings became the anchor point of their days. Some afternoons, Catherine would read aloud from her book, her voice a soft melody alongside the rustling leaves, while William would whittle a piece of scrap wood, his hands always busy, always creating. Other days they would just talk, the words flowing more easily with each meeting, the topics deepening from favorite foods and weather preferences to dreams and memories that were more tender, more guarded. It was on one such evening as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet, that a comfortable silence settled over them. They were sitting side by side, their shoulders almost touching. The air was cool and Catherine gave a slight, involuntary shiver. William noticed. He hesitated for a moment, a silent question in his eyes. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached over and covered her hand with his. It was not a dramatic gesture, but it felt monumental. His hand was warm and rough from work, a solid, real weight on hers. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability. In response, she simply turned her hand over beneath his, lacing her fingers through his. A perfect fit. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, as the stars began to prick the darkening sky. The world narrowed to the point where their hands met, to the warmth spreading from that single point of contact throughout their entire bodies. It was William who finally broke the silence, his voice low and hushed, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the perfect moment. "You know," he began, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand, "all day when I'm working I find myself thinking about what I'm going to tell you when I see you. The funny thing I saw, a thought I had. I save up my day for you." He paused, gathering his courage. "Being here with you, Catherine, it doesn't feel like an escape. It feels like coming home." Tears, sweet and unanticipated, welled in Catherine's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. It was the most beautiful sentence she had ever heard. It wasn't a line from a story, it was real and it was for her. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, squeezing his hand tighter. "I feel exactly the same way." In that moment, sitting on the bench he had restored for her, their hands intertwined, the foundation of their friendship was quietly, irrevocably, laid with the cornerstone of something deeper, something lasting and true. The picnic was over, the lemonade was gone, but they had built something far more substantial in their place. The change in their relationship was not a loud or dramatic event, but a quiet, seismic shift in the very air between them. The comfortable friendship that had blossomed on the park bench now deepened into something richer, more intentional. They were no longer just two people who enjoyed each other's company, they were William and Catherine, a pair, a unit. Their meetings evolved from afternoon picnics to proper dates. They went to the cinema, sitting in the dark, their attention less on the screen and more on the simple, thrilling fact of their joined hands resting on the armrest between them. They took long, meandering walks by the lake, their steps synchronized, their conversation a low, intimate murmur that belonged only to them. A new language developed, one composed not of words but of touch. A hand placed gently on the small of William's back as Catherine passed him in her tiny kitchen, making him feel steadier than any foundation he had ever laid. His arms slung comfortably over her shoulders as they walked, pulling her close against the evening chill and against the world. The way he would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his work-roughened fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. These small points of contact became their punctuation, their way of saying, "I am here. You are safe with me." The air around them seemed to crackle with a gentle, persistent energy, a constant, unspoken acknowledgement of the powerful current flowing just beneath the surface of their everyday interactions. It was on one of their walks that the weather turned. The sky, which had been a clear, pale blue, suddenly darkened to a deep, bruised gray. A cool wind whipped through the trees, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, slow and fat. They were far from the park entrance, far from any real shelter. Laughing, breathless, William grabbed her hand and they ran, not away from the storm, but towards the cover of a gigantic ancient oak tree, its branches spreading out like a vast, leafy canopy. They ducked under its protection, the world outside dissolving into a silvery curtain of pouring rain, the drumming on the leaves a loud, intimate music that enclosed them in their own private world. They stood close together, catching their breath, their clothes damp and clinging. The scent of wet earth and ozone filled the air, fresh and exhilarating. Catherine leaned back against the broad, rough trunk of the tree, and William stood before her, his hands resting on the bark on either side of her, caging her in, but in the most wonderful way. The light was dim and green, filtered through millions of wet leaves. They were so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the tiny droplets of rain caught in his dark hair and eyelashes. He looked at her, his gaze intense, tracing the lines of her face as if committing them to memory. The playful energy from their run faded, replaced by a profound, breathless stillness. The atmosphere grew thick, charged with a meaning so potent it was almost a physical presence. William's heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sheer, terrifying depth of what he felt for her. It was a chasm, beautiful and bottomless, and he was standing at its edge. His voice, when he finally found it, was a hushed, almost awed whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Catherine," he breathed, his eyes searching hers. This feels too deep." It was a confession. He was telling her that his feelings were so vast, so overwhelming, that they threatened to consume him. He was vulnerable, laying his fear and his wonder at her feet. Catherine understood him perfectly. She saw the trepidation in his eyes, but she also saw the love, a love so strong it was almost frightening. She didn't shy away. Instead, a slow, soft, knowing smile spread across her lips, a smile that held no fear, only a profound and welcoming certainty. She reached up, her hand cupping his jaw, her thumb stroking his rain-dampened skin. Her voice was as soft as the rustle of the leaves above them, a gentle invitation, a promise. "Then take your time," she whispered, her eyes locked with his. "Fill me slowly so I'll never forget you." It was both permission and a plea. She was asking him not to be afraid of the depth, but to explore it with her, carefully, completely, so that every sensation, every emotion, would be branded into her soul, a permanent and cherished memory. Those words were the final key, unlocking the last of his hesitation. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to turn away. She didn't. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was not a frantic collision, but a slow, tender discovery. It was a conversation without words, a gentle exploration that held the weight of all their afternoons on the bench, all their shared stories, all their intertwined hopes. It was soft and searching, a promise whispered from his lips to hers. The rain continued to fall in sheets around them, but under the shelter of the old oak tree in their green, private world, time seemed to stop, holding its breath for them. When they finally parted, breathless and dazed, they rested their foreheads together, their eyes still closed, sharing the same air. No words were needed. The kiss itself had been a vow, more binding than any spoken oath, a vow to navigate the beautiful, terrifying depths together. The invitation to his cottage was the natural next step, a quiet understanding that passed between them without the need for grand pronouncements. It was a place William spoke of with a soft fondness, a small, sturdy house nestled on the very edge of town where his garden ran wild and the sound of the city was just a distant hum. For a full, glorious weekend, it would become their entire world. Catherine packed a simple bag, her heart fluttering with a mixture of nervous excitement and deep, unwavering certainty. This was not a trip, it was a pilgrimage into the heart of who they were together. He met her at the door, his smile warm and welcoming, and as she stepped across the threshold, she felt not like a guest, but like someone arriving where they were always meant to be. The cottage was exactly as she had imagined, warm, lived in, and filled with the evidence of his hands. There were shelves he had built, a rocking chair he had carved, and the gentle woody scent of cedar and old books. It was a sanctuary, and for the next 2 days, it was theirs alone. Their time there unfolded not in a series of events, but in a collection of slow, precious moments that wove themselves into the fabric of their shared history. The first morning they made breakfast together in the small, sunlit kitchen. It was a clumsy, laughing dance of bumping hips and shared tasks, him scrambling eggs while she buttered toast, their movements slowly synchronizing until they moved around each other with an easy, practiced grace. They ate at a small wooden table by the window, talking about nothing and everything, the simple meal feeling like a feast. Later they simply talked, curled together on his worn, comfortable sofa as the afternoon light faded. They shared stories they had never told anyone else, secrets and childhood scars, dreams that felt too fragile to speak aloud in the bright light of day. Here, in the soft gloom of the cottage, they offered these vulnerable parts of themselves to each other, and were met not with judgment, but with gentle understanding and the safe harbor of a trusting embrace. In the evening, with no music playing but the sound of the crickets outside, he took her hand and pulled her to her feet. They swayed together in the middle of the living room, a slow, silent dance, her head resting on his shoulder, his arms holding her close. It was a dance of pure feeling, a conversation of the heart. And as the moon rose, casting a silver light through the bedroom window, their love for each other found its most profound and trusting expression. It was a quiet, deliberate exploration, the final, beautiful translation of a language they had been building since they first met on a park bench. There was no rush, no urgency, only a deep and reverent attention. His hands, so strong and capable with wood, were infinitely gentle with her, learning the landscape of her body with a patience that made her feel worshipped. Every touch, every soft sigh, every whispered name was a sentence in their private story. This was the subtle spice of their romance, not in grand passion, but in the intense, focused intimacy of two souls becoming one. It was in the way he looked into her eyes, his gaze holding hers as they moved together, ensuring she was with him every single step of the way. It was in the way she arched into his touch, a silent affirmation of her trust and her own deepening desire. It was a slow, building fire that warmed them from the inside out, a physical manifestation of the emotional bond they had so carefully constructed. It was not just about bodies, but about the complete and total surrender of two people who had found their home in one another. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet dark, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heart, a profound peace settled over them. They had crossed a threshold. They were no longer just William and Catherine, two separate people in love. In this quiet cottage they had built their own world, a world where they were the only two inhabitants, bound together by a trust that was as unshakable as it was unspoken. The passage of a year did not dull the brightness of their love. Instead, it polished it, smoothing away any lingering uncertainties and deepening its inherent luster. The cottage on the edge of town had truly become their shared home, a place filled with the mingled scents of his wood smoke and her books, their lives so seamlessly intertwined it was impossible to imagine one without the other. Their park bench remained their sacred spot, the silent witness to the beginning of their story, and they visited it often, a weekly ritual of remembrance and gratitude. Yet, William had been different lately, possessed by a quiet, secretive energy. He would disappear into his workshop for hours at a time, emerging with sawdust in his hair and a mysterious tender smile playing on his lips whenever Catherine would ask what he was working on. "A project," was all he would say, his eyes twinkling. "A special one." One evening, as the late summer sun cast a golden honeyed light through the trees, he suggested they take a walk to their bench. The air was warm and still, filled with the sleepy chirping of crickets. Everything felt soft and dreamlike. As they approached their corner of the park, Catherine noticed something different about the bench even from a distance. There was a new, deep richness to the wood on the seat's backrest, a patch that seemed to have been recently, meticulously worked. Her steps slowed, her heart beginning to beat a little faster with a sweet, burgeoning suspicion. She drew closer, her eyes widening. Carved into the wood with an artist's exquisite care and patience were two names, flowing together as if they were always meant to be one: William and Catherine. And beneath them, a simple, powerful promise: our forever spot. The carving was not crude or rushed, it was a work of art, the letters elegant and deep, filled with a dark, polished resin that made them gleam in the sunset light. It was permanent. It was a testament. Tears, immediate and unbidden, sprang to Catherine's eyes, clouding the beautiful sight. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they traced the smooth, cool surface of the carved letters, feeling the love and the countless hours he had poured into this. It was the bench he had restored for her, now forever marked with their story. She turned to him, her voice a choked whisper: "William, it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done." But he wasn't just standing there. While her attention was fixed on the carving, William had slowly, deliberately, lowered himself to one knee on the grass before their bench. In his hand he held a small velvet box, and within it, a simple, stunning ring, its single stone catching the last of the sun's rays and holding them captive. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her. He looked up at her, his earth-colored eyes shining with unshed tears of his own, filled with a love so profound and certain it took her breath away. The world around them, the park, the sounds, the fading light, all of it melted away until there was only him, only them. "Catherine," he began, his voice strong and clear, yet thick with emotion. "You walked into my life on an ordinary day and made it extraordinary. You saw the man I was and you made me want to be a better one. You are my favorite story, my greatest adventure, my home." He paused, drawing a steadying breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "This bench was our beginning. Let this ring be our promise. Will you let me fill all your days with this love? Will you marry me?" There was not a single moment of hesitation, not a single doubt. It was the easiest, most certain answer she would ever give. "Yes," she breathed, the word bursting from her with a joy so pure it was almost painful. "Yes, William. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, a perfect promise. He rose to his feet and she fell into his arms, their embrace fierce and joyful, their laughter mingling with happy tears as he spun her around. They held each other for a long time, standing before the bench that bore their names, the symbol of a love that had been carefully built, tenderly deepened, and was now joyously sealed. They had found their forever in each other's arms, a love story written not in a book, but in the grain of a park bench and the unwavering promise of two hearts that had become one. If this story of a love built slowly and forever captured touched your heart, then you've just experienced the kind of narratives we live to tell. This journey of William and Catherine, from a simple park bench to a promise of forever, is a testament to the idea that the most profound connections are often built one gentle moment, one shared story at a time. If you believe in the power of such stories, if you long for more tales that explore the quiet depth of real connection, the tender moments that define a lifetime, then your perfect next chapter is waiting for you. We have a whole library of such heartfelt journeys waiting to be discovered. Become part of our community of dreamers and romantics. Subscribe to the channel, and let us continue to explore the beautiful, complex, and ultimately hopeful landscape of the human heart together. Your next favorite story is just a click away. The city below Adrian's office was a sprawling tapestry of twinkling lights, a kingdom of glass and steel that he had conquered through sheer, unrelenting will. Up here on the top floor, the world was silent, save for the soft, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard. The sound came from Isabel, his secretary, who was working late yet again. To anyone else, the office was a monument to cold, corporate power, all sharp angles and immaculate surfaces. But to Adrian, it had recently begun to feel different. It had begun to feel like it contained a son, and that son was named Isabel. She was, without question, the most efficient employee he had ever had. She anticipated his needs with an almost psychic ability, her memos were flawless, and her calm demeanor could soothe his most stormy moods. For months he had appreciated this. He valued her. But then, without his permission, his feelings had started to change. He began to notice the little things. The way she would tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The gentle scent of her perfume that lingered in his office long after she had left. The way her laughter, a sound he rarely heard but desperately craved, could make him look up from his most important contracts. This new awareness was a problem. A colossal problem. Adrian Blackwood was a man who ruled his life with a set of ironclad rules. They were the foundation of his success, the walls that protected him from chaos and complication. And the most important, unbreakable rule was this: no personal entanglements with employees. Ever. It was a line that, once crossed, led to nothing but disaster, a mess of blurred loyalties and office gossip. He had seen it destroy other men, other companies. He would not let it destroy his. Yet, as he watched her from his desk, illuminated by the soft glow of her computer screen, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. He found his eyes tracing the curve of her neck, following the delicate line of her shoulders. A dangerous, unfamiliar heat began to uncoil deep within him, a feeling so potent it was almost a physical ache. He was her boss. She was his subordinate. This attraction was not just inappropriate, it was a betrayal of his own principles. He tried to fight it. He buried himself in work, took long, punishing business trips, but her absence only made the office feel emptier, and his return more anticipated. The final straw came on a Thursday. A difficult client had been shouting at him over the phone, and Adrian's temper, a legendary force within the company, was rising to a boiling point. Isabel had entered quietly, placed a fresh cup of coffee on his desk, black, 2 sugars exactly how he liked it, and her fingers had briefly, accidentally, brushed against his. A simple, innocent touch. But it sent a jolt of electricity shooting up his arm, so intense it stole his breath. He had jerked his hand back as if burned, his conversation faltering. She had merely given him a small, apologetic smile and retreated, completely unaware that she had just unraveled him with a single, fleeting contact. That was the moment he knew he had to say something. This tension was becoming a tangible thing in the room, a thick, heavy silence that stretched between them during their meetings. He could see a new wariness in her eyes, a confusion that mirrored his own. She felt it too, this impossible pull. And that made it all the more dangerous. The office was dark now, the rest of the staff long gone. The only light came from the moon outside and the dim glow of Isabel's desk lamp. She was packing her bag, her movements graceful and quiet. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, traitorous drumbeat. This was a terrible idea. It was unprofessional. It was a breach of every boundary he had ever set. But the need to speak, to warn her, to somehow release this building pressure, was overwhelming. He stood up, his chair rolling back silently on the plush carpet. He walked out of his office and towards her desk, his footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. She looked up, her eyes wide and questioning. He came to a stop mere inches from her, so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, so close he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. The air crackled between them, charged with everything they had not said, with every look they had tried to hide. "Isabel," he said, his voice a low, rough gravel, stripped of its usual corporate authority and filled with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. It was a struggle to keep it steady. She looked up at him, her lips slightly parted, her breath catching. She didn't step back. She held her ground, her gaze locked with his, and in that moment he saw it. Not just fear but a flicker of the same desperate attraction that was consuming him. He took a slow breath, the scent of her perfume filling his senses, making his head spin. "I need to warn you," he began, each word feeling like a stone dropped into the silent room. "I have a rule. A very important rule. And you are making it incredibly difficult to remember what it is." He leaned in just a fraction, his eyes burning into hers. "I find that I can't control myself around you. This feeling, it's dangerous. For both of us. You work for me. That is a line. A line that cannot, under any circumstances, be crossed." The words hung in the air, a confession and a prohibition all at once. He wasn't just warning her, he was admitting his own weakness, showing her a crack in his formidable armor. He was telling her that she, Isabel, had the power to disrupt the ordered universe of Adrian Blackwood. He waited, his entire body tense, for her to react, to be offended, to be frightened, to push him away and run from the room, preserving the fragile world order he had just threatened to shatter. But she didn't. She just continued to look at him, her expression a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like understanding. The warning was out there, a barrier erected between them. But instead of pushing them apart, it felt like the first forbidden thread of a connection had just been spun, tying them together in a secret they now shared. The game had begun, and the rules had just become infinitely more complicated. The warning, instead of building a wall, became a doorway. In the days that followed, the air in Adrian's office grew thick with everything left unspoken. A simple exchange of documents was no longer just a business transaction. It was a ceremony of near misses and deliberate, careful movements. When Isabel's fingers passed a file to him, they would slow, hovering for a fraction of a second too long, a silent acknowledgement of the electricity that lived in the space between their skin. Adrian found himself inventing reasons to call her into his office, just to watch the way the light from the window caught her hair, to feel the shift in the room's atmosphere the moment she stepped inside. He would give a simple instruction about a merger or a stock report, but his eyes would be saying something else entirely, a silent, intense conversation that only the two of them could understand. Isabel, for her part, became an expert in the language of stolen glances. She learned to feel his gaze on her back from across the room, a physical warmth that would spread through her, making her heart stutter. She would look up from her computer and find his dark eyes already on her, and in that brief, locked gaze, a whole universe of forbidden promise would pass between them. The professional facade they maintained was paper-thin, a delicate performance for the rest of the world, but underneath it, a current of pure, undiluted tension was building, day by day, glance by glance, threatening to tear through the fragile pretense at any moment. The dam finally broke on a night of relentless, pouring rain. It was past 9, and the office was a silent, dark island in the storm. Isabel was finishing up a last-minute presentation, the click of her keyboard the only sound beside the drumming of the rain against the panoramic windows. Adrian emerged from his office, his jacket off, his tie loosened, a look on his face she had never seen before, a raw, unguarded vulnerability that made him look younger and far more dangerous. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked to the window and watched the water streak down the glass, distorting the city lights into blurry smears of color. "It's getting worse," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the sound of the storm. Isabel stilled her typing, her hands frozen above the keys. She thought he was talking about the weather. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of a storm of their own. "This thing between us. I can't focus. I can't think about anything else. I laid down a rule, and all I've done since is try to find a way around it." He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing before her desk, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. "I have to know, Isabel, before I lose my mind completely. Do you feel this too? Or am I completely alone in this?" The directness of his question shattered the last of her defenses. There was no room for professional evasion, for polite denial. The truth was a living thing in the room, demanding to be set free. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not alone." The admission hung in the air, simple and seismic. It was all the permission he needed. In 2 strides he was around the desk, his hand reaching for hers, pulling her to her feet. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the feel of his strong, warm hand enveloping hers, to the intense, burning look in his eyes. "Then the rules don't apply to this," he murmured, his other hand coming up to cradle her face, his thumb stroking her cheek with a shocking tenderness. "Not to this." And then he was kissing her. It was not a gentle, questioning kiss. It was a claiming, a release of weeks of pent-up longing and desperate restraint. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and coffee and the sweet, terrifying surrender to something that felt infinitely more powerful than any company rule. It was a kiss that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the very same time. That kiss was the key that unlocked their secret world. They became masters of a double life, architects of a hidden reality built in the shadows of their public one. Their dates were not normal dates. They were covert operations, meticulously planned and executed with the precision of a military campaign. He would send a car for her, its windows tinted, to a private airfield where his jet would whisk them away to a secluded coastal town where no one knew the name Adrian Blackwood. They would walk on deserted beaches, her hands safely tucked in his, their conversation not about stock prices or board meetings, but about childhood dreams and forgotten fears. He told her about the loneliness of his rise to the top, the weight of constant expectation. She told him about her small-town family, her desire for a life that felt real, not just successful. In these stolen moments, the billionaire and the secretary ceased to exist. They were just Adrian and Isabel, 2 people discovering each other with a hungry, desperate intensity. Their intimacy grew in these hidden spaces, away from prying eyes. A quiet dinner in the candlelit corner of a restaurant he owned under a different name, where his hand would rest on her knee under the table, a constant, warm pressure. The first time he took her to his penthouse, not the corporate apartment, but his true home, a sprawling, art-filled space high above the city. It was there, with the entire world glittering below them, that their physical relationship deepened, moving beyond kisses to a deeper, more profound exploration. It was a discovery of touch and taste, of whispered secrets in the dark, of learning the landscape of each other's bodies with a reverence and a passion that left them both breathless and shaken. He was a man used to commanding everything in his life, but with her, he learned the power of surrender. She was a woman who had always played it safe, but with him she discovered a wild, untamed part of herself. Their connection was a fire, banked and hidden during the day, but burning with a fierce, brilliant heat in the privacy of the night, a secret they nourished and protected, the most precious and fragile thing either of them had ever known. The secret world they had so carefully constructed began to develop hairline fractures. It was the little things, the almost imperceptible shifts in the atmosphere of the office that Adrian, in his blissful distraction, failed to notice, but that Isabel, with her finely tuned sensitivity, felt like a change in barometric pressure. A shared glance across the conference room that lasted a moment too long, the way his hand would linger on the small of her back when he passed her in the hallway, these tiny precious moments of connection, once their secret fuel, now felt like evidence carelessly left at a crime scene. She began to notice the way Sarah, from accounting, would quickly look away when Isabel caught her staring, the hushed conversations that would abruptly stop when she entered the break room. A cold dread started to coil in her stomach, a certainty that their beautiful, fragile bubble was about to be popped by the sharp pin of office gossip. She tried to mention it to Adrian, to voice the quiet fear that was growing inside her, but he would simply pull her into his arms, his kiss a potent distraction. "Let them talk," he'd murmur against her lips, his confidence a towering fortress. "You're worth any rumor." But his reassurances couldn't stop the whispers from growing louder, more pointed, transforming from a background hum into a distinct, ugly chorus she could no longer ignore. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Isabel was printing documents when Mark, a junior executive known for his ambition and lack of tact, approached the printer bank with a smirk she didn't like. "Morning, Isabel," he said, his tone slick and knowing. "Big presentation today. I guess it pays to have the bosses, special attention. Must make those late nights a lot more rewarding." The insinuation hung in the air, toxic and humiliating. The words weren't just an attack. They were a violation, reducing the profound, complicated love she shared with Adrian to a cheap, tawdry cliché. She felt the heat of shame flood her cheeks, her hands trembling as she gathered her papers without a word, fleeing before the tears welling in her eyes could fall. She locked herself in a bathroom stall, leaning her forehead against the cool metal, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. This was the cost of their secret. This was the reality she had to face while Adrian lived in his insulated world of power and privilege. She was not just his lover, she was his employee, and in the eyes of everyone else, that would always make her position suspect, her accomplishments tarnished. When she finally, haltingly, told Adrian what had happened later that night, the change in him was instantaneous and terrifying. The relaxed, loving man she knew vanished, replaced by the cold, formidable billionaire the world feared. His eyes, usually so warm when they looked at her, turned to chips of black ice. His jaw tightened and she could see the muscle ticking there, a visible sign of the fury he was holding in check. "He said what to you?" His voice was dangerously quiet, a low rumble of thunder before a storm. He listened as she recounted the incident, her voice shaking, and with every word the air in the room grew colder. This was no longer about a broken office rule. This was about someone deliberately causing her pain, disrespecting the woman he loved. He saw the hurt in her eyes, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, and a protective, primal rage ignited within him. The time for secrets was over. The next morning, Adrian called an emergency meeting of the entire senior staff. The summons was abrupt, the tone in the email leaving no room for refusal. A nervous energy filled the large conference room as people filed in, speculating about a hostile takeover or a catastrophic financial report. Isabel took a seat near the back, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. She had no idea what he was planning. Adrian entered last, his presence commanding an immediate, total silence. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood at the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, cold and unyielding before it landed and softened on hers. "For the past few months," he began, his voice clear and cutting through the tense silence, "there have been whispers in these halls. Whispers about me. And whispers about my secretary, Isabel." A collective, almost imperceptible intake of breath filled the room. Isabel felt her face flush, her nails digging into her palms. This was a public execution and she was on the scaffold. He was going to deny it, to humiliate her to save his company's reputation. "I called you here today to address those whispers directly," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers, a lifeline in the storm of her panic. "The truth is you are all correct. There is something going on between Isabel and myself." He paused, letting the shockwave ripple through the room. "I have fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with her." The silence was now absolute, stunned. Isabel could only stare, her mind reeling. This was not a denial. This was a confession. "And because I love her," Adrian said, his voice gaining a new, fierce intensity, "I will not allow anyone in this company or anywhere else to disrespect her. I will not have her integrity questioned or her character maligned. She is the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I have failed to protect her from the very environment I created." He took a slow, deliberate step toward where she sat. "So, effective immediately, I am making one change to correct that failure." He stopped directly in front of her chair. Every eye in the room was on them. "Isabel," he said, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, meant only for her despite the audience. "You're fired." The city was a creature of steel and light, its heartbeat a steady, relentless rhythm of ambition and exhaust fumes. In a skyscraper that pierced the smoky twilight, Daniel sat in an office that was more like a glass cage, a kingdom of silence at the end of the day. He was a king with a heavy crown. The numbers on the screen in front of him were a mutiny, a silent rebellion that threatened to topple everything he had built. A proposed merger, the one he had staked his company's future on, was crumbling to dust, and the board of directors was starting to look at him with the cold, hungry eyes of sharks sensing blood in the water. He was the mighty CEO Daniel, a man who commanded rooms with a single look, but in that moment he felt the terrifying weight of being completely and utterly alone. Pushing back from the desk with a force that sent his expensive chair rolling, he decided to flee his gilded prison. He needed air that wasn't filtered and recycled, a world that wasn't made of profit margins and betrayal. His long legs carried him for blocks without him really seeing where he was going. He left the wide, bright avenues of the business district and turned down a quieter street, where the buildings were shorter and the shop fronts were smaller. The night air was cool, a welcome shock to his system. It was then that he saw it, a little splash of color in the monochrome city. A flower shop, its windows filled with a messy, beautiful explosion of petals and greenery. The sign above the door, "Abigail's Blooms," was written in a soft, curling script. The open sign was still lit, though it was well past closing time. Driven by a curiosity he didn't understand, Daniel moved towards the door, his shadow falling long and dark across the display of sunflowers. Inside, the world was different. The air was thick and sweet, a perfume of earth and 1,000 different blossoms. It was a quiet, living chaos. And in the middle of it all was a girl. She had her back to him, standing on her tiptoes to mist a hanging basket of purple flowers. She was humming a tune, something soft and unfamiliar. She wasn't like the women he knew, the ones in sharp suits and even sharper smiles. She wore a simple, soft-looking sweater and jeans, and her hair was the color of rich, dark honey, falling in waves down her back. She turned, and her eyes, the color of warm caramel, widened just a little in surprise. There was no recognition in them, no flicker of seeing the powerful Daniel. She just saw a man who had wandered in off the street. "Oh," she said, her voice as gentle as the environment around her. "I was just about to close up." Daniel meant to just nod and leave, but the words that came out were different. "I'm sorry to bother you." He gestured vaguely, a rare moment of being unsure. "I was just walking." She smiled then, a small, genuine thing that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. "It's no bother. It's a good night for walking." She looked at him more closely, her head tilting. "You look like you've had one of those days that feels like a year." He let out a breath, a real one, not the shallow sighs of his boardroom. "Something like that." "My name's Abigail," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Daniel," he replied, and for the first time in a long time his name felt like just a name, not a title. She moved around the counter. "You know what this place needs? And what you probably need too. A cup of tea. I was just about to make one for myself. Chamomile? It's good for days that feel like years." You should have said no. He had a car waiting, a penthouse apartment, a million problems to solve. But he found himself nodding, a slow, grateful movement. Tea would be nice. He watched her as she moved, a picture of unstudied grace. She filled a kettle in a small sink behind the counter, her movements efficient and calm. She didn't try to make small talk about the weather or business, she just let the quiet comfort of the shop settle around them. When she handed him the steaming mug, their fingers brushed and a simple electric warmth passed between them. It wasn't a dramatic shock, but a quiet hum, a connection. They talked. He found himself telling her things he hadn't realized were weighing on him. Not the specifics of the merger, but the feeling of it all, the loneliness of leadership, the constant pressure, the doubt that gnawed at him in the quiet hours. She listened, truly listened, her gaze never leaving his face. She told him about moving to the city, about loving the simple honesty of plants, how they only thrived when given the right kind of care. She spoke of a life that was small but full, a life built on quiet joys, a life he couldn't even imagine. An hour slipped away then too. The tea was gone, and the city outside the windows had grown darker and still. Daniel realized he hadn't looked at his phone once. The mutiny in his company felt a million miles away. He was simply Daniel, a man talking to a kind girl in a flower shop. "It's getting late," Abigail said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I should probably head home." The thought of going back to his empty, silent penthouse was suddenly unbearable. The thought of her going to her own home, alone, was equally so. "Where is home?" he asked. "Just a few blocks away," she said. "It's a small place. Nothing fancy. Can I walk you?" The question was out before he could stop it. It was an old-fashioned, almost forgotten gesture. She looked at him, a long, searching look, and then she nodded. "I'd like that." The walk was quiet, their footsteps echoing on the pavement. Her apartment building was old and charming, with a creaky front door and a staircase that smelled faintly of lemon polish. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was tiny, filled with mismatched furniture, more plants, and the soft, warm light of lamps. It was a home. It was the most welcoming place he had ever been. He didn't know who moved first. Perhaps it was him, drawn to the quiet light in her eyes. Perhaps it was her, reaching for the solid strength she felt in him. But suddenly they were kissing. It was not a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was a collision of two lonely worlds, a desperate, passionate search for connection in the dark. It was a storm of feeling, of hands exploring, of clothes falling away, of two bodies seeking solace and finding an unexpected, blazing fire. And then, in the heat of it all, he felt her tense. A small, sharp gasp that was different from the others. A flinch of real pain. He stopped immediately, his body still thrumming with need. "Abigail? What's wrong?" In the dim light from the window, he saw her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. Not tears of sadness but of something else. Something profound. She shook her head, her voice a fragile whisper. It's nothing. I'm okay. Please don't stop." He was confused, but the raw need in her voice, the trust, pulled him back in. He was more careful then, more tender, worshipping her with a reverence he didn't know he possessed. The passion returned, slower, deeper, more meaningful, until they both fell over the edge, clinging to each other as if they were the only solid things in a spinning world. Later, as the first hints of dawn painted the sky gray, Daniel lay awake. Abigail was sleeping peacefully beside him, her head on his chest. He looked at the small dark red stain on the white sheets. The truth of it hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had been a virgin. The knowledge settled in his stomach like a stone. This wasn't just a night with a pretty girl. This wasn't a fling. This kind, gentle soul had given him something priceless, something she could never get back. She had trusted him with her whole self. And in that quiet, life-altering moment as he watched her sleep, Daniel knew, with a terrifying and absolute certainty, that he would never, ever let her go. The city outside Daniel's penthouse windows began to stir, a slow tide of light washing over the steel and glass, but he saw none of it. His world had shrunk to the memory of a single room, scented of earth and blossoms, and the profound, terrifying trust in a woman's eyes. He left Abigail's apartment as the sun broke the horizon, his body humming with an energy that was entirely new. It wasn't the familiar thrill of a business conquest or the grim satisfaction of outmaneuvering a rival. This was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to have rewired his very soul. He walked the streets back to his own sterile world, not as a CEO returning to his throne, but as a man who had discovered a fundamental truth about himself in the most unexpected of places. The memory of her, of the shocking innocence she had gifted him, was a film playing behind his eyes, obscuring the busy streets, the honking cars, the entire city. She was a quiet pulse in a world of noise, and he was helpless to listen to anything else. For 3 days he existed in a strange, suspended state. The crisis at his company, the mutinous board members, the failing merger, it all felt like background static, a dull play he was being forced to watch. His assistants noticed the change, the way his gaze would drift during crucial meetings, the uncharacteristic silence where sharp questions used to live. He was a king distracted, his mind perpetually in a small, warm apartment filled with plants. He found himself staring at flower arrangements sent to the office, their perfect corporate symmetry an insult compared to the wild, beautiful chaos of Abigail's shop. He needed to see her again to confirm that the magic of that night wasn't a dream, that the woman who had unraveled him so completely was real. The urge was a physical ache, a pull stronger than any business deal. He sent her simple texts asking about her day, telling her he was thinking of her. Her replies were sweet, a little shy, and they fueled the growing obsession inside him. He needed to know everything about her. It wasn't suspicion that drove him, but a desperate, all-consuming hunger to possess every part of her story, to understand the universe that had created someone so pure. On the 4th day the hunger won. Sitting in his office, the hum of the city a distant drone, he gave the order to his head of security, a man named Evans who was paid exorbitantly to be discreet and thorough. "I need a background check. Abigail. From the flower shop, Abigail's blooms. Everything." He framed it as a matter of security, a standard precaution for someone he was seeing, but the lie tasted bitter in his mouth. He was invading her privacy to sate his own need. The report came back faster than he expected, a thin, cold digital file that contained the power to shatter the warm, beautiful world he had built in his mind over the past few days. Evans delivered it with a neutral expression, but his eyes held a flicker of warning. Daniel opened the file and his world, so recently realigned, tilted on its axis once more. Abigail Miller. Age 24. Parents deceased, car accident when she was 12. Raised by her sole living relative, her maternal grandfather. The name of her grandfather was Robert, the Vulture Holloway. Daniel's blood ran cold. Robert Holloway. His father's most hated rival. The man who had spent 30 years trying to destroy their family company, a bitter, ruthless old hawk whose very name was synonymous with vendetta in Daniel's world. The man whose own daughter, Abigail's mother, had been disowned for marrying beneath the family's approved status. Holloway had hidden his granddaughter away, keeping her out of the spotlight, a secret treasure to be protected from the cutthroat world he inhabited. And Daniel, in his isolated tower, had never known she existed. The forbidden nature of their connection was a lock clicking shut, a cage being built around the beautiful, fragile thing they had started. She wasn't just a flower shop girl. She was the heir to his family's greatest enemy. Their love wasn't just unlikely, it was a betrayal, a declaration of war. He drove to her shop that evening, the file burning a hole in his mind. The cheerful bell above the door sounded like her alarm. Abigail looked up from a bouquet she was tying, and her face lit up with a smile that was both a balm and a torture. "Daniel?" She came around the counter, but her steps slowed as she saw the grim intensity on his face. "What's wrong?" "I know," he said, his voice low and rough. "I know who your grandfather is." The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of fear. She took a small step back, her hand fluttering to her throat. You looked into me?" "I had to," he said, the justification feeling weak even to him. He closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her arms, not to hurt her but to anchor himself. "It doesn't matter. Abigail, listen to me. None of it matters. The companies, the feud, the old hatred. It's just noise. What matters is this. What matters is you. What I feel for you." Tears welled in her caramel eyes. "You don't understand, Daniel. My grandfather, he hates your family. He'll never allow it." "Then we won't ask for his permission," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a passionate, determined whisper. "This is between you and me. No one else. This is our secret." And so the forbidden game began. Their world became a tapestry of stolen moments and whispered promises. He could no longer pick her up at her shop or her apartment. Their dates were clandestine operations. A late-night picnic in a deserted park, the city lights twinkling like distant, unjudging stars. A drive to the coast, windows down, the salt air whipping through their hair as they held hands, two fugitives from a war they never started. He would book a private dining room under a fake name, and they would share a meal, talking for hours, the outside world held at bay. The secrecy, the danger, only made their connection more intense, more electric. Every touch was amplified by the knowledge that it was forbidden. Every kiss was a rebellion. Their intimacy, born from that first shocking night, deepened into something profoundly passionate, a spicy and desperate language of the body that spoke of their limited time and boundless feeling. In the dark of his car, in the quiet of a hidden hotel suite, they explored each other with a fervor that was as much about comfort as it was about passion, building a private universe where last names and family legacies held no power. For a few weeks it worked. They lived in their beautiful, fragile bubble. Daniel found a happiness he had never known, a peace that settled deep in his bones. He started to dream of a future, a way to end the feud, to bring their two warring worlds into harmony. He saw a life with her, a real life, not the lonely existence he had always known. But outside their bubble, the old hawk was circling. Robert Holloway had his own network of informants, his own reasons for watching his hidden granddaughter. A grainy photograph, taken from a long lens, arrived on his desk. It showed Daniel and Abigail, their faces close, laughing in the front seat of Daniel's car. The betrayal Holloway saw was not just that of his granddaughter consorting with the enemy, but a chilling echo of his own daughter's defiance. He saw history repeating itself, and his rage was a cold, calculated fire. He went to Abigail's apartment. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He was far more dangerous than that. He sat in her small living room, a king in a peasant's chair, and laid out his case with devastating precision. He spoke of Daniel's reputation as a ruthless businessman. He spun a web of lies so plausible they felt like truth. He told her Daniel had known who she was all along. That their first meeting was no accident. That the entire romance was a carefully orchestrated plan, a cruel and sophisticated revenge plot to break Holloway's heart by corrupting his only remaining family, the final move in a decades-long game of corporate chess. "He is using you, my dear," Holloway said, his voice dripping with a grandfather's feigned concern. "He is not the man you think he is. He is his father's son. And when he has what he wants from you, he will discard you. He will destroy you." Alone and terrified, the seeds of doubt took root in Abigail's heart. The grand, sweeping romance began to feel like a trap. Daniel's intensity, his quick possession of her, his wealth and power, it all suddenly seemed like evidence against him. The memory of his background check now felt sinister, not protective. Her love for him warred with a lifetime of conditioning to fear and obey her grandfather. Fear won. With a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, she picked up her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type. She sent the message that would break both their worlds. "We can't see each other anymore. This was a mistake." Then, as her grandfather had instructed, she turned off the phone, packed a single bag and disappeared from the city, leaving behind the flower shop, her apartment, and the man she loved, convinced he was her greatest enemy. The silence that descended upon Daniel's life after Abigail's text message was not a simple absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the world. The vibrant colors of his penthouse view leached away into a relentless, monotonous gray. The text message, those few cold words, echoed in the cavern of his mind on an endless, torturous loop. A mistake. The word was a shard of glass in his heart. He read it 100 times, standing frozen in the middle of his office, the frantic buzz of his company feeling like it was coming from another planet. The initial shock was a physical blow, leaving him breathless. Then came the cold, sharp clarity. This was not her. This was not the woman who had looked at him with such unwavering trust, who had shared her deepest self with him in the quiet sanctuary of her apartment. The Abigail he knew did not speak in the language of cold, final mistakes. This was the language of Robert Holloway. This was the venom of their family's feud, expertly injected into their perfect, private world. He tried to call her. The phone went straight to voicemail, her sweet, recorded voice a fresh agony each time. He drove to her flower shop, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, only to find the lights off and a simple closed sign hanging in the door. He went to her apartment, pounding on the door until a neighbor peeked out, informing him with a nervous shrug that the young woman had moved out in a hurry just the day before. She was gone. Truly, completely gone. Vanished as if their entire world had been a dream. A cold, hard knot of desperation tightened in his chest. This was not a retreat. This was an abduction of her will. Holloway had taken her, not just physically but mentally, poisoning her mind against him. The thought of her somewhere, believing his love was a lie, believing she was nothing more than a pawn in a cruel game, was unbearable. His obsession, once a warm, protective flame, transformed into a cold, focused fire. He would find her. He would burn down every lie that stood between them. He would get her back or he would have nothing left at all. He turned his entire being, all the formidable resources and relentless will that had built his corporate empire, towards this single personal mission. The failing merger was officially shelved, the panicked board members placated with a terse, unyielding command to stand down. His war room was no longer the boardroom. It was his private study, the walls papered with maps and the digital trails Evans and his team were unearthing. Holloway was clever, a master of obfuscation, using shell companies and trusted old retainers to hide his movements. But Daniel was smarter, and he was fueled by something far more powerful than business rivalry. A love that felt like the only real thing he had ever possessed. For days he lived on coffee and grim determination, following every lead no matter how faint. The breakthrough came not from a corporate paper trail, but from a simple human one. A withdrawal from a bank account linked to one of Holloway's most loyal drivers, a man who had been with the family for 40 years. The withdrawal was from a small, remote town, a place nestled in the rolling hills miles from the city, a place Holloway owned, a secluded, rustic property, a hunting lodge he never used, a perfect place to hide a heartbroken granddaughter. Daniel did not hesitate. He did not call for a team or a plan. He simply stood, grabbed his car keys and walked out of his penthouse, leaving the world of the CEO behind. The drive was a blur of asphalt and gathering storm clouds that mirrored the tempest in his soul. He pushed his car faster, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to open countryside, his mind rehearsing 1,000 speeches, 1,000 ways to break through the walls Holloway had built around her. He arrived as the first drops of rain began to fall, spotting the lodge at the end of a long gravel driveway, looking lonely and forsaken against the darkening sky. He parked and walked towards the front door, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, a declaration of his arrival. The door opened before he could knock. Robert Holloway stood there, his face a mask of cold, triumphant fury. "Get off my property, Crestmore," the old man spat, using Daniel's last name like a curse. But Daniel's gaze was already past him, into the shadowy interior of the lodge. And there she was, Abigail. Standing in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. She looked pale and fragile, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but they widened in sheer, unadulterated shock at the sight of him. "Daniel?" His name was a whisper, a breath of disbelief. "He's here to gloat, Abigail," Holloway snarled, not turning to look at her. "He's here to see the damage his little game has caused." Daniel ignored him completely, his entire being focused on her. "It was never a game, Abigail," he said, his voice low and intense, carrying across the room. "Look at me. Do I look like I'm playing a game?" He took a step forward and Holloway moved to block him. The tension crackled in the air, thicker than the impending storm. "Grandfather, please," Abigail whispered, her voice trembling. "It's over, Daniel," Holloway said, a smug final note in his voice. "You've lost." She knows the truth. The truth? Daniel's voice rose, finally tearing his eyes from Abigail to lock onto the old man. You want the truth? This was the moment. This was the gamble for everything. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a weapon but for a single folded document. He thrust it at Holloway. This is the merger agreement with Sterling Global. The one you've been trying to sabotage for 6 months. I was going to sign it next week. It would have made my company the dominant force in the industry for the next decade. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Then he looked back at Abigail, his eyes blazing with a raw, desperate honesty. I've withdrawn the offer. I've instructed my lawyers to draw up new papers. I am ceding my controlling interest in Crestmore Industries. I'm walking away from it. All of it. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. Holloway stared at the document in his hand, his face a confused mask of avarice and disbelief. You're lying. You'd never. I would, Daniel said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, yet somehow filling the entire space. For her, I would. I am. A company, a fortune, a name, it's all just paper and ego. It's nothing. It's empty. It's the loneliest kingdom in the world. He took another step, now standing directly in front of Abigail, close enough to touch her. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the war between her grandfather's lies and the undeniable, shattered man standing before her. He told you I was using you for revenge? This is my revenge, he said, gesturing to the document in Holloway's hand. Walking away from the very thing our families have been fighting over for generations. Let him have it. Let the feud end with me right here, right now. He slowly sank to one knee on the rough-hewn wooden floor, the CO brought low, not by a rival but by love. He looked up at Abigail, his eyes glistening, his voice thick with emotion. Abigail, he began, the name a prayer on his lips. The night I met you was the first night I stopped feeling lonely. You are not a pawn. You are not a game. You are my peace. You are my truth. You are my forever. He reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. Please, marry me. Let me prove it to you for the rest of my life. Abigail stared down at him, the last of her grandfather's lies crumbling to dust in the face of this impossible, monumental sacrifice. A man did not give up a kingdom for a game. He did not look at her with that kind of raw, broken devotion if it was all a lie. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another. A sob escaped her, but it was a sob of relief, of joy, of a heart being put back together. She nodded, her hand tightening around his. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Daniel. Yes. As she said the word, something shifted in the room. Robert Holloway watched the scene, the signed document that represented his ultimate victory feeling like ashes in his hand. He saw the way his granddaughter looked at Daniel, a look of such pure, unshakable love that it mirrored the look his own daughter had given the man he had disowned so many years ago. He saw the cycle, not of betrayal but of a love strong enough to defy him. The fight drained out of him, leaving behind only the tired, hollow shell of an old man. The war was over. He had won the battle he had fought for decades, and in winning he had lost everything that truly mattered. He turned without a word and walked out of the room, leaving them alone in their hard-won peace. The wedding was small, just as Abigail wanted. It was held in her flower shop, now reopened and more vibrant than ever, transformed into a bower of her favorite blossoms. There were no business magnates or society pages, only a few true friends and, surprisingly, a quiet, stoic Robert Holloway who sat in the back, a silent witness to a new beginning. Daniel and Abigail exchanged their vows surrounded by the scent of earth and flowers, their hands clasped tightly, their eyes locked. They had found their forever not in boardrooms or family fortunes, but in the quiet, unshakable truth they had built between them. They had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed but stronger, their love the one thing that could not be broken by any feud, any lie, or any power in the world. Their story proves that the most powerful forces in the world aren't money or power, but trust, sacrifice, and a love brave enough to fight for what's real. If you believed in their journey, if you felt their struggle and celebrated their hard-won happiness, then subscribe. Because here we believe every great love deserves a witness, and we never know what unforgettable story awaits us next.